Hey everybody, Tony D with a hot take on, a Reddit reply, I guess you'd call it. I was in Reddit room arguing politics as I often do. Wasn't even really arguing this time, but there's this article from WashingtonMonthly.com. Trump is the most crooked president in American history. That should matter. And my response was, says anyone who's never read history, it's amazing how many people give George W. a pass after his war criminal activities killed hundreds of thousands. So I just wanted to read the response I got and reply here because I think it'll be easier than writing a whole long thing. I get caught up in it. Although this is my second take thanks to technical difficulties, so hopefully I won't have them again because I went on way too long. All right. I won't say the guy's name. I don't want to call him out, but this is my response. This is his response first. Your interpretation is without nuance. Well, no kidding. It's Reddit. And yours also, admittedly, in your own later, you admit that don't take me to task on all the details. So, I mean, that's a pointless point. Meme-based history books would be scary indeed. Thanks. I don't know what that has to do with me. I didn't post a meme. W and his cronies should have been indicted. You're right. I don't deny that. I'm actually very far left and feel that way strongly. You don't have to be far left to know that W was a war criminal. Lots of people died in the Iraq War needlessly. They lied to get us into the war. They kept us there. You don't have to be, it doesn't matter what political stripe you are. So I don't know why you're telling me that you're actually very far left. You're on Reddit. I already know you're very far left. Continuing, I also understand why it didn't happen. Aha! Special insight from the Reddit rando. Ultimately, someone had to remove Saddam Hussein from power. No, they didn't. Saddam Hussein was a dictator of a Middle Eastern country that we should have stayed out of. The whole reason Saddam had all the weapons he did, the whole reason Saddam had the power to begin with to invade Kuwait was because we gave him a bunch of weapons in the late 80s, I believe, mid to late 80s, to push the Iraq-Iran war, where thousands and thousands of people died. And why did we push that? Oh, well, that was because in 79, the Iranians took back their embassy and took a bunch of hostages, and, well, it was a big deal. Read about it sometime. But why did the Iranians take the hostages? Why did they suddenly get all mad at us? Well, because you may or may not know that we backed the Shah of Iran, the previous ruler, who was a cruel tyrant. Well, that's weird. Why would we do that? Well, see, we were in a Cold War with the Russians, and we did that in a lot of countries in order to get at the Soviets and make sure they didn't take over yet another country. Well, why did we do that? Well, the Cold War was sort of a chess game of proxies, and it was something that I personally was against because, see, the Soviets were communist, and their whole system was going to collapse. And by confronting them in this manner, we outspent them, but we also didn't hasten their demise. See, empires expand and collapse. The Soviets were essentially an empire. It was a different kind of empire. They were communist. But, if they had taken over, for instance, Iran, what difference would it have made? We made Iran more hostile to us than had the Soviets taken it over and had to run the damn place. Because the Soviets would have run it badly, and it would have been yet another country occupied by them that would have had resistance fighters trying to kick them out, just like Afghanistan. So why did we get involved in all of that? Well, the Cold War came out of World War II. And we stupidly aligned ourselves with Stalin and got ourselves in an entangling alliance, being in the Allies. So when things went to hell, we got pulled into the war. We got bombed. We got pulled into the war. And yeah, that was all very complicated. I'm not going to go into every detail of World War II to explain my point. But why did that happen? Well, that happened as a result of the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. A war that we never should have been involved with. Why did we get involved with that? Well, because Woodrow Wilson wanted to divvy up the spoils with the other allies. And essentially they got us sucked into decades and decades of more warmongering. And I could keep going back further and further, but my memory of history at this point is I can only make this video so long. So my point is, history is a sort of cascading. And history in the United States tends to cascade towards war, which is not good. So if you're saying that ultimately someone had to remove Saddam Hussein from power, well, you're just ignoring history. History is just wars, wars, wars. In the United States, in particular, we're pretty warlike at the end of the day. Now, one could argue that our goals are righteous and that at the end of the day, we help people. We try to help people anyway. But it still doesn't change the fact that Saddam Hussein wasn't immortal. In fact, he had a psychotic son named Uday Hussein who probably would have killed him or gotten himself killed. Eventually did. And he also had another son who was much like his father and probably would have had the father shot or shipped to a compound so he could take over. That's what happens to Middle Eastern dictators, by the way. The Husseins were keeping a cork on all the religious, I'll say, I don't want to say intolerance, that's probably the wrong word, but all the religious fighting that would have been going on. And the moment you uncorked that genie, well, you saw what happened. So nobody had to remove Saddam Hussein from power. And in fact, if you look at Gaddafi before Obama and Hillary decided to get their grubby mitts all over it, Gaddafi was bringing in from the cold. McCain and the other two amigos were trying to reform Gaddafi. And he had given up his nuclear weapon thing. I don't think he had much of a program, but he was coming in from the cold. Now, that didn't mean he was going to suddenly start holding elections and turn Libya into the 51st state. But what it did mean was once he died or passed on his power, the next guy wouldn't be as bad as Gaddafi. He would see that Gaddafi got some respect on the world stage, peace was happening, and then either he'd move into a more peaceful or democratic situation with the populace, or he probably would be weak enough to be overthrown by a guy who would do that. Now, that's not 100%, but, that was generally the pattern that was going on at the time. These countries, if you're a dictator, you can only sustain yourself by constantly oppressing the masses, by constantly keeping them in fear. And it's exhausting. And when you get old, someone tougher and more cruel can come up and take you out. Or people just get sick of it and they rise up and throw you out because they don't have nothing to lose anyway. You're torturing them anyway. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't our business. We've been mucking around in that part of the world for years. And it's brought us nothing but problems. So, I am an anti-interventionist. You are obviously a pro-interventionist that sees a situation and you feel that we have to intervene. I say no. I think you have very poor strategy in that. But continuing on your discussion here. W tried to privatize it, referring to the Iraq War, and that was a problem. I would disagree. I don't think he tried to privatize it. I think it was just a lot of corruption, the usual sort of profiteering going on, a lot of it through Cheney. Continuing, it wasn't really that he did it, it was how he went about it. No, I don't think he did it. I'm not sure you're using privatization in the right thing here. Corruption is corruption. However, if he goes about corruption the right way, I mean, there's no right way to do corruption. It just breeds more corruption. I mean, there's books on the topic. Please don't take me to task for insufficient summary. I know you know that there's probably 15,000 crimes to be charged from those days. Yeah, and I'm not just talking about corruption. I'm talking about the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. That goes on George W.'s. He's directly responsible for them. Now, if you look at the Clinton era, when the sanctions went on, at least 1 million Iraqi children died. Those are kind of indirect deaths. You can put them at the Clinton administration's feet, certainly, but they are indirect. You could argue that, well, if Saddam had just come around, they wouldn't have had all those deaths, and it's partly on him. Yeah, it is. But these are direct deaths. George W. started this war. He didn't have to. It was started on a lie. It had nothing to do with 9/11. He had no reason to do this. And, we're still suffering the consequences. I mean, one American general called it the greatest blunder in American history. I mean, I don't see how you argue with that. Continuing, like someone pairing their moldings with someone else's cherished portrait brushes, the problem isn't the result, but the technique. Well, hoity-toity sentence. But again, no, the technique, I don't really care how you are corrupt. I just care that you're corrupt. And I don't want you to be corrupt. I want you to be honest and more forthright with the American people. Trump, for all his bluster, he says a lot of truths at the end of the day. When he called, some of these countries S-hole countries, you may not agree with that sort of tactless, grim assessment, but there was some truth in it. When George W. says, we're spreading liberty, he was full of S. Essentially, Congress forgave W. given the context of 9/11. He guided the government into doing criminal things, but the government backed him. Ride or die style. I would say that the people who backed W., and that was most people in Congress, they just do what congressmen do. They back people when it's politically expedient to do so. The context of 9/11 is irrelevant. I mean, why he did it, yeah, I know why he did it. He did it because of 9/11. It doesn't justify what he did, doesn't make it any less of a crime. In fact, I think it makes it worse. And you're comparing what exactly to Trump? I mean, trying to make peace in the Koreas and in Russia, making peace in the Middle East, booming economy, trying to keep us out of wars. I mean, I don't see how that compares. Trump, on the other hand, has had no context for his behavior. What behavior are you referring to? He has not been given illegal orders in response to an attack. Okay. It's all been craven to protect himself. What has? What are you talking about? That's the big difference here, he says. See, it's why ultimately Hillary gets a pass for Benghazi and the emails why W gets the same pass. Hillary gets a pass on the emails. Actually, I don't think she gets a pass on the emails. They had a hearing, but that is a still open investigation. They have the emails. They have them through Anthony Weiner's laptop. Weiner. Geopolitics is hard. I agree. It's complicated. I agree. And there's really high stakes. I agree. There's not much in terms of backup plans. Disagree. There's all kinds of backup plans. When the CIA topples a government, they back both sides. So whoever wins, they win. That's a backup plan. That's 4D chess. And that's the big geopolitical chessboard. There's not much in terms of backup plans. make a play and the consequences last. Yeah, but it's not always the play you want, and it's not always the correct play. Continuing, so when Hillary was faced with turning over her State Department's sensitive information to a suspected Russian asset, she destroyed it and said, instead, nice try. But she knows more than anybody that Trump wasn't a Russian asset. And in fact, she created all this nonsense in order to undermine him during the election. We know that now from the investigations. We know that that the Russians didn't make Trump a Russian asset. They just want to continue going after the Russians, and they can't do that if they have peace with the Russians. They're afraid that if the Russians get on their feet, they have so much land and resources that they'll jog right past us. That's part of the geopolitics of this. I would say that if we made peace with the Russians, we could crush China, and we could divvy up, pretty much make world peace. We're the two biggest superpowers in the world. No one can stand up to the United States on their own, but certainly no one on the planet could stand up to the United States and Russia. And we could make plenty of money exploiting their resources. Not that we would exploit them per se, but we cut deals with them, like real deals. And yes, the Russians are corrupt and blah blah blah, but they're still a federation at the end of the day. They're not the Soviet Union. Continuing. And though they complain, the investigations cleared her because that's exactly what you want a Secretary of State to be able to do. You want them to be able to make those calls. Not Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's extremely corrupt. And if you look at the WikiLeaks emails about how she ran the State Department, the State Department is supposed to be the diplomatic arm of the United States. She ran it like her own CIA. She spied on UN diplomats. I mean, how are you supposed to run diplomacy when you're spying on your own diplomats and then get caught giving the orders via WikiLeaks? I mean, she had them spying on everybody at all times. That's what the WikiLeaks emails refer to. Oh, get anything you can. Get the credit card information. For everyone? What? We're spying on everyone? We have a spy organization to spy on people. Okay? We don't need to have the State Department. We need separation of powers here. Just because Hillary didn't get elected president doesn't mean she could turn the State Department into the co-presidency or the co-CIA so she could spy on everybody. Do you know that Hillary wanted Obama to give her her own private army? Yeah, the State Department was going to have its own army that would protect all the embassies and essentially be used to run CIA operations in all the embassies. That was the goal. And she did it anyway, or at least tried to. That was part of the problem with Benghazi. She put an embassy in a war zone. Libya was still a war zone. No one was running the country. How do you have an embassy when you don't have a leader of a country? If you know anything about the history of Libya, it's really 3 countries. There's 3 different tribes there. When the Brits came in, I guess it was in like 48, and pointed to a guy and say, you're now the king of Libya. He said, I don't want to be the king of Libya. I want to be the king of my tribe. Let the other tribes have their own countries. To which the Brits said, no, we're calling it Libya, and you're the king. And that's when the problem started. We picked up on that, and look, again, just like Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi kept a lid on those tensions. When Gaddafi was dead, pop goes the genie. And out all those various factions came. On top of the fact that they were using mercenaries from Chad. And part of the reason for the slave market in Libya is the Chad mercenaries were being used by Gaddafi, and they were considered very cruel, and the people of Libya hated them. Well, there were also a bunch of workers from Chad too. So when the country fell apart, guess what? The locals went after anybody from Chad. Anybody who was dark-skinned, African, they went after. So that's the kind of atmosphere Obama and NATO and Hillary organized it. Look at the WikiLeaks emails. Created. And she knew that would happen. But she was arrogant enough to believe that she could just waltz in with the CIA and pull all the levers of power and, oh, don't worry, we're running things now. We'll put our puppet in and we'll run Libya and get all its resources up to who was running France at the time, because the French were really big on the oil in Libya. How'd that work out? Not so good. So, and I wouldn't count Hillary out of the woods yet. She was only Secretary of State. Yeah, they don't put presidents in jail. That's too much. They're not going to put W in jail. But they might go after Hillary. Maybe. Not likely. But they might. She's fading into the background. She's losing her power. When Trump gets another turn, we'll see. And so they didn't charge W either, because ultimately you want presidents to bend and break the rules if the situation is dire. What situation are you talking about? W didn't have a dire situation and had to bomb Iran or Iraq. He didn't have to invade Iraq. He didn't have to invade Afghanistan. The 9/11 hijackers trained in Hamburg, Germany, and Florida. Were we going to invade there too? It made no sense. That was the one time he should have used the CIA to get Osama bin Laden, because that's when you use covert ops. They were a stateless organization, Al-Qaeda. It made no sense to send the army. I mean, I don't think I have to explain this to you, but apparently I do. And finally, you end with, we admire Lincoln for these exact qualities. I don't know why you admire Lincoln. I guess you seem to be speaking for all of America here. I think Lincoln is admired for his speeches and the fact that he kept the Union together and that he ended slavery. That's why he's admired. Lincoln also did a lot of bad things. He suspended habeas corpus. He burned the South. They salted the earth. They did nasty things. He set up the conditions for Reconstruction, which caused all sorts of problems in the decades to come. Some problems we're still dealing with today in terms of the racial tensions. And he had other options available to him, and he didn't take those options. He could have bought out the South, but he was beholden to Northern business interests who were competing against the South, and they found it hard to compete with slave labor. So the economic factors can't be ignored in that scenario. Now, it doesn't make Nixon a bad guy for having his goals align with the Northern business interests to some degree, but it does put it into context. Remember context? Lincoln, we didn't admire Lincoln because he broke the rules. Most people admire Lincoln because he partly has been romanticized, but partly because he won. When you read about Lincoln in context, it's a different story. Some of the things he said. But I don't want to get too deep into that. But anyhow, that's my response. So I'll post that on the link, and we'll see how you respond. Thank you. I don't hold any ill will towards you. I'm just making my video response. Thank you for responding. I thank you for being polite. I think most people on Reddit can be very rude, and you put a polite response. So no hard feelings. And if you want to put another response to my video, I look forward to reading it.